Here we are again, folks. JWC Livestream. That's Joe's Writers Club Livestream. This is Sublimated Posey with David and Ricky. We're here today to do some reads and to talk about Posey, language play, word play, poetic voice fulfillment. What does that mean? Well, how do you know what to write? How do you know how much to write? What's your own unique style? Which is one of the most important things you have is your literary voice, the thing that distinguishes you from millions of other writers. Well, that's done by accessing transcendence and poetry and all of these deep concepts, the kind of things we're trying to figure out today. We're trying to look into these texts and figure out what about them achieves that voice, that fulfillment of poetry. David, how are you today?
I'm fine. How are you today, sir?
Very good, very good. Considering it's a Monday, everything's going swell. Considering we're on this twisted mud ball, everything's great. Did some writing before. Now we're about to talk about creativity. I'm fine. So creatively speaking, I wrote a story since last week. We missed last Thursday. There were some issues with the normal show, so we did a Babbletron read. But last Monday, we did that Darn Gray piece. You remember that, David?
Yes, I do.
Well, I knew about Darn Gray, and I had read bits and pieces of that book, but I had never paid it its due. And that's something I plan to correct, having read it, because it's like it sounds like a great book. I knew Darn Gray was, as far as a pop cultural reference, but just the concept of that painting, you know, it hit me funny. There was like a muse flash, a bolt of inspiration. And I realized that I had to write this story. I had to write this story about a painting, but it's like a remix. It's like a totally different concept. So I was still able to work on some Chiron 6, but I haven't, I touched Anthonyum today. So everything's going great. I'm like juggling 3-4 projects. I think it's a fantastic thing because there's no way for the muse to get bored in that circumstance. So it's a wonderful thing. How about you, David? How's everything going with you, and how's your creative life been?
It's been going very well. I've been working on drafting a new story idea based on a painting called The Temptation of St. Anthony. And it's based on a very famous painting by an artist named Hughes van Becken. Yes, I think Becken or something of that nature. But it's sort of a comic reimagination of the classic religious icon. Imagery, and it's something that a lot of artists have painted about St. Anthony. But I'm also working on several poems, lengthier poems, and of course I'm working on Athenaeum. And I went through and made some additions to a book that I'm working on called Billy, which is about murder and a haunting. So that I've been very busy. It's just sort of been like you. It's been jumping back and forth between projects and doing a little here and a little there.
I mean, I think it's great. I think it's the best way to be, to have 3 or 4 what I call muse ports. Muse port is like if I have a hankering to write in a certain mode, like they can be genres, muse ports, but they could also be like mediums. Like maybe I I have a one for poetry. So I have a document open where I throw down notes or I write a poem in it. And I have different documents for the different novels I'm working on. And it's all about like, well, where is the inspiration flowing? Like, what does the muse want to write? So it's good to juggle multiple projects. If old Tom were here, he'd say the same thing. He likes to juggle too. It's good for the creative, right? How does it make you feel to have a bunch of projects that you're doing at the same time? Like, what is like? By that I mean, like, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Are you still feeling it out?
In my case, early on when I was writing, I've written poetry for most of my life, but fiction is something that came within the past 10 years. I started slowly write. So I primarily consider myself a poet, but I regard it as if I am sort of like a compass that is shifting between two poles. And on one side, you have poetry, and on the opposite, of course, you have fiction. But they're very different in scale and scope, but they can also have the potential to be anything we choose that it to be. So a poem can be a very small work, or it can be an epic poem. It can be a poem like tonight's poem. So, yes. So
that was a very elegant segue you just
yes.
did there. Very, very fond of that. So in the spirit of that, David Anderson, our resident poet, he shows us the way. So today's poem, we read a poem, folks. We discuss, we read a piece of prose, we discuss, and then we try to sort it all out and get some kind of wisdom from it. It's not hard. It's been working out pretty good lately. So today's poem for you is The Drunken Boat by Arthur Rimbaud, translated by Wallace Foley, apparently. So, go. As I was going down impassive rivers, I no longer felt myself guided by haulers. Yelping redskins had taken them as targets and had nailed them naked to colored stakes. I was indifferent to all crews, the bearer of Flemish wheat or English cottons. When my haulers this uproar stopped, the rivers let me go where I wanted, into the furious lashing of the tides, more heedless than children's brains the other winter. I ran and loosened peninsulas, have not undergone a more triumphant humbug. The storm blessed my sea vigils. Lighter than a cork, I danced on the waves that are called eternal rollers of victims. 10 nights without missing the stupid eye of the lighthouses. Sweeter than the flesh of hard apples is to children, the green water penetrated my hull of fur and washed me of spots of blue wine and vomit, scattering rudder and grappling hook. From then on, I bathed in the poem of the sea, infused with stars and last ascent, devouring the azure verges, where like a pale elated piece of flotsam, I pensive drowned figure sometimes sinks, where suddenly dying the blueness, delirium and slow rhythms under the streaking of daylight, stronger than alcohol, vaster than our lyres, the bitter redness of love ferments. I know the skies bursting with lightning and the water spouts and the surf and the currents. I know the evening and dawn as exalted as a flock of doves. And at times I have seen what man thought he saw. I have seen the low sun spotted with mystic horrors, lighting up with long violet clots, resembling actors of a very ancient dramas. The waves rolling far off their quivering of shutters. I have dreamed of the green night with dazzled snows, a kiss slowly rising to the eyes of the sea, the circulation of unknown saps, and the yellow and blue awakening of singing phosphorus. I followed during pregnant months the swell, like hysterical cows, and its assault on the reefs, without dreaming that luminous feet of the Marys could constrain the snout of the wheezing oceans. I struck against, unbelievable Floridas, mingling with flowers, panthers' eyes, and human skin. Rainbows stretched like bridal reins under the horizon of the seas to greenish herds. I have seen enormous swamps ferment, fish traps, where a whole leviathan rots in the rushes, avalanches of water in the midst of a calm, and the distances cataracting toward the abyss. Glaciers, suns of silver, Narcissus waves, skies of embers, hideous strands at the end of brown gulfs, where giant serpents, devoured by bed bugs, fall down from gnarled trees with black scent. I should have liked to show children those sunfish of the blue wave, the fish of gold, the singing fish. Foam of flowers rocked my drifting, and ineffable winds winged me at times. At times a martyr weary of poles and zones, the sea whose sob created my gentle roll, brought up to me her dark flowers with yellow suckers, and I remained like a woman on her knees. Resembling an island tossing on my sides the quarrels and droppings of noisy birds with yellow eyes, and I sailed on when through my fragile ropes drowned men sank backward to sleep. Now I, a boat lost in the foliage of caves, thrown by the storm into the birdless air, I whose water-drunk carcass would not have been rescued by the monitors and the Hanseatic sailboats, free, smoking, topped with the violet fog, I who pierced the reddening sky like a wall, bearing delicious jam for good poets, lichens of sunlight and mucus of azure, who ran spotted with small electric moons, a wild plank escorted by black seahorses when Julys beat down with blows of cudgels and ultramarine skies with burning funnels. I who trembled, hearing at 50 leagues off the moaning of the behemoths in heat and the thick maelstroms, eternal spinner of the blue immobility. I missed Europe with its ancient parapets. I've seen sidereal archipelagos and islands whose delirious skies are open to the sea wanderer. It is in these bottomless nights that you sleep and exile yourself. Million golden birds, oh, future vigor. But in truth, I have wept too much. Dawns are heartbreaking. Every moon is atrocious and every sun bitter. Acrid love has swollen me with intoxicating torpor. Oh, let my keel burst. Oh, let me go into the sea. If I want a water of Europe, it is the black, cold puddle where the sweet smelling twilight, a squatting child full of sadness releases a boat as fragile as a May butterfly. No longer can I bathe in your languor or waves, follow in the wake of the cotton boats, nor cross to the pride of flags and flames, nor swim under the terrible eyes of prison ships. Marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. What an image-rich tour that was. Many, many flashes of imagery in what we call mind theater. Mind theater is that bright imagination that a text can bring and the time dilation as a result, where you can just keep reading beautiful things like that. It's like it's feeding your brain sugar, talking about water spouts and archipelago skies and sea vigils, azure verses, all these wonderful things, flocks of doves, and then another one, birdless skies. There's just so much here, the snout of the wheezing oceans. Delicious, man. Convincing that there's some experience there when it comes to the sea. So what did you think of that read, David, and the poem? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
I think you did a very fine job reading the poem. As to the poem, I would like to start with the fact that the poet wrote this when he was 16.
Whoa, wait.
Yes.
This came out of a 16-year-old mind?
Yes, it did. It's possibly the most original French poem that has ever been written.
No wonder these people shriek about Rimbaud. It makes total sense.
Yes.
This is 16. That's like,
yes, it is.
Wow.
He was an authentic genius.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say.
Yes.
I gotta rip his book, wherever his book is. I think I could see it on my shelf over there.
Yes.
I have got to get that book open, because if there's another one even remotely close to this, I need to expose my brain to it at once.
He wrote a very fine book called The Season in Hell, and then another book called Illuminations, which is a book of prose poetry.
I think Illuminations is the one I have, but
yes, very fine book.
I want to read the one this came out of, though. Like that's the one I want to get, because
he sent this to Paul Verlaine, another fine French poet. And Paul Verlaine wrote back, "You are summoned, come." And Paul Verlaine was living with his wife in Paris, and when he saw this poem, it was, imagine receiving this in the mail from a poet that's basically a child.
Yes, yeah. That's what it is. I mean, look, clearly he had a devoted study. He must have had some sort of tutor or mentor, because otherwise, if we just credit this to pure genius, that means he read this into existence. And that I don't understand how that could be.
Well, the very fact is that he did do that. He created all of this. This was a new kind of poetry. I mean, if you look at the high level of the symbolism, it's just stunning, absolutely breathtaking.
What year was, I don't mean to cut you off, what year was this written? Is there any idea, even if I knew what century he lived in? Because this does, I understand what you're getting at. It was
the 19th century, so.
But it's very, very modern. Like, I hear William Carlos Williams, I hear Allen Ginsberg, I hear a bunch of different, I'm not saying it's derived or ripped off, or I'm saying not even cribbed, but the influence is clearly there,
Yes. Well, this is a very fabulous and famous poem. It has earned its place in history. This poem will exist long after everything that I've written. That I would say almost 98% of the poetry today doesn't even cut the mustard to serve as it's just this. It's very easy to get ecstatic and praise this poem. Let me put it that way. It's when I use the term original, I have no doubt in using that word in association with this poem.
I can see why. This poem to me foreshadows the poetry of the 20th century.
It does.
Like it really does. It's like an out of place artifact. It feels like so much. and now I can understand the breast beating about Rimbaud. Whereas it's great, man. It was a great selection. Thank you for that.
America has not produced anything close to this in poetry, to be completely honest. We have produced some great poets like Ginsberg, for example. I would say another great, the classic poets like Walt Whitman, Robert Frost, Emily Dickinson. Modern poets, I would say John Ashbery. John Ashbery was very much influenced by Arthur Rimbaud.
I was always very taken by William Carlos Williams Patterson.
Yes, and another fine poem.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just gorgeous, and you feel the energy coming off of the poem. Like I did lots of work in Patterson during my career, and hoofing around in Patterson, you feel that energy, especially when you're by those waterfalls and stuff. You know, you know, at least I was charged with the poem, so perhaps it's just me, but it's the same energy, it's the same structure. Like this guy talks to the sea and of voyages and of the nature of shorelines, and it's like it's the same dynamic. Very impressive, you know.
Well, considering he stopped writing when he was 19, moved to North Africa, became a gun runner, traded. Unfortunately, there are some parts of his history that are unfortunate to talk about, but he was involved in some very shady stuff, and all of this was because he ran away from home several times, starting at around the age of 13. He grew up on a farm in a village called Charlottesville, and he had a very stern sort of demanding mother who ran this farm. His father disappeared right after he was born. He was an officer and an alcoholic. So he was fleeing from the tyranny of his mother's presence in his life, basically. It's very easy to drop into biographical details about the poet, but it does help to understand, particularly for this poet, that this is a poem about freedom. He was escaping his origins, and the price, it's in first person, and the poem in its freedom represents the drunkenness in the title. This being cut from his origins. There's a sense I've read interpretations of it that there's no crew. Obviously, if you look at the poem, you don't see that there's crew. So the first question is, what happened to the sailors on the ship? The idea is that the entire crew and all the passengers were murdered. So the ship is cut adrift. So there's that. I can see, or I saw your eyebrows going up because you didn't see it in the text. But if you walk it from the ending of the poem back to the very beginning, the first question that a reader may want to ask is, where is the crew of the ship? It's been cut adrift. So something very traumatic has happened.
I mean, now I can see, especially given the last couple lines and then the title.
Yes.
Now I can see in sort of retrospection, but in the same token, I at first was just thinking, well, he was being selfish and he was just ignoring the others. But that it's a drunken boat, now anything's possible. I see where you're going with that.
Yes.
Very, very interesting, subtleties there. So subtle that they're snappable. Like you can barely, like I would have had to read it a couple of times before I picked that up. So it's not just image rich, it's also clever. It's got a bunch of things going for it.
And I mean, I can't think of another poet who has written a masterpiece at that age.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty incredible to be at that age and to write such a thing.
It has heartbreaking lines in it too, such as in the at the end of the poem. We start with the line, "But in truth, I have wept too much. Dawns are heartbreaking. Every moon is atrocious, and every sun bitter. Acrid love has swollen me with intoxicating torpor. Oh, let my keel burst. Oh, let me go into the sea. If I want a water of Europe, it is the black, cold puddle where, in the sweet-smelling twilight, a squatting child full of sadness releases a boat as fragile as a May butterfly." See, you see how he just let it sort of dissipate all of the dynamic energy and drama, and he closes the second to last stanza with a boat as fragile as a May butterfly. You have a special fondness for butterflies, I know.
I love them. There's nothing else. There's nothing else like them. The things they do, the things they communicate. You know.
So, yes, we could spend many live streams just reading this poem, and it's an instructive. That's the wonderful thing about what we're doing here is people can take this poem and print it up or download it and just pull it apart and study it. Poets, writers, really, I know for a fact that I'll never create anything near the magnitude of greatness in this poem. So that's one of the reasons I bring these kind of poems in, because I want people to have an opportunity to see what great literature can do for their writing and for their capacity in dreaming.
That's right, folks. And he's right. A poem like this is a work of genius, and genius is a transcendent force. So the only way to approach such magnitude of creative energy is to reach into transcendence the way that this 16-year-old Rimbaud did. Just because it feels like it can't be done doesn't mean that it might not be done. You know, reach into transcendence when you write. I agree with David, it's unlikely because the poem is so potent, it's undeniable, it's inescapable. But that doesn't mean that in some apocalyptic frontier that a person in the future or someone now couldn't try to write something and reach into transcendence and have it be as luscious as that was. Never give up. But I agree, David makes a valid point. I don't know how to do that. And I certainly at 16 years old, I wouldn't know how to do it.
How many of us actually do something that's original?
Well,
that's the question that I'm trying to bring up is at that young of an age, it's not original in every sense, but it's original in its total impact and weight.
But I understand what you mean by originality. Go on. I have something I want to add to. I don't want to interrupt.
Yes. No, it's quite all right. But I really, if I were to put out a challenge to anyone who's listening who is a writer, your duty as a creative person, as a creative soul, is to achieve something beyond yourself, something greater than yourself. And the only way you can do that is through just abandoning your ego and aiming for something outside of yourself. You often speak of the transcendence in poetry and literature. I mean, I think this is very transcendent. I mean, it certainly uses very dense metaphorical language and symbolism, and it talks about things that most people may not associate with God or gods, but it transcends an ego. If you look at it from a biographical point of view, Rimbaud was trying to escape the drudgery of living in a farm, on a farm in the nowhere in France. He was trying to escape his mother, who was a tyrant, who had been left with a farm and 3 children to care for. She was a single mother. For any of our listeners who are single parents, you may want to consider that as well. But I think that's what I'm trying to get at, is the goal should be transcending to something better than just writing biographically, something beyond that. And I know that Ricky understands that.
Yeah, folks, and everything, I agree with everything David said, but the thing that I will add also is at 16, he saw the future of poetry. At 16, he composed the future of poetry. His genius is not just in how marvelous it all came together, but the fact that it sounds like the future. It doesn't sound exactly like the landscape of poetry that he comes from. So his horizons are far, his eye is innovating. You know, his third eye of imagery is open. That's multiple points of transcendence. We'll have to circle back to that. We'll have to come up with some kind of way of measuring transcendent quality, because that's definitely what's there.
Yes.
That's a marvelous selection, David. And now we'll move on to the prose read. This is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. What a lark. What a plunge. For so it had always seemed to her when, with a little squeak of the hinges, which she could hear now, she had burst open the French windows and plunged at Burton into the open air. How fresh, how calm, stiller than this, of course. The air was in the early morning, like the flap of a wave, the kiss of a wave, chill and sharp, and yet, for a girl of 18, as she then was, solemn. Feeling as she did, standing there at the open window, that something awful was about to happen. Looking at the flowers, at the trees with the smoke winding off them, and the rooks rising, falling, standing and looking until Peter Walsh said, "Musing among the vegetables? Was that it? I prefer men to cauliflowers. Was that it?" He must have said it at breakfast one morning when she had gone out onto the terrace, Peter Walsh. He would be back from India one of these days, June or July, she forgot which, for his letters were awfully dull. It was his sayings one remembered, his eyes, his pocket knife, his smile, his grumpiness, and when millions of things had utterly vanished, how strange it was. A few sayings like this about cabbages. She stiffened a little on the curb, waiting for Dirtnall's van to pass. A charming woman, Scrope Purvis, thought her, knowing her as one does know people who live next door to one in Westminster. A touch of the bird about her, of the jay, blue-green, light, vivacious, though she was over 50 and grown very white since her illness. There she perched, never seeing him, waiting to cross, very upright. For having lived in Westminster, how many years now? Over 20. One feels, even in the midst of the traffic, or waking at night, Clarissa was positive, a particular hush or solemnity, an indescribable pause, a suspense, but that might be her heart affected, they said, by influenza. Before Big Ben strikes, there, out it boomed. First a warning, musical, then the hour, irrevocable. The leaden circles dissolved in the air. Such fools we are, she thought, crossing Victoria Street. For heaven only knows why one loves it so, how one sees it so, making it up, building it round one, tumbling it, creating it every moment afresh. But the verest frumps, the most dejected of miseries, sitting on doorsteps, drink their downfall, do the same. Can't be dealt with, she felt positive, by acts of parliament, for that very reason. They love life. In people's eyes, in the swing, tramp, and trudge, and the bellow and the uproar, the carriages, motor cars, omnibuses, vans, sandwich men shuffling and swinging, brass bands, barrel organs, in the triumph and the jingle and the strange high singing of some aeroplane overhead was what she loved. Life, London, this moment of June. For it was the middle of June. The war was over, except for someone like Mrs. Foxcroft at the embassy last night, eating her heart out because that nice boy was killed. And now the old manor house must go to a cousin, or Lady Bexborough, who opened a bazaar, they said, with the telegram in her hand. John, her favorite, killed, but it was over, thank heaven, over. It was June. The king and queen were at the palace, and everywhere, though it was still so early, there was a beating, a stirring of galloping ponies, tapping of cricket bats, Lords Ascot, Renelag, and all the rest of it, wrapped in the soft mesh of the gray-blue morning air, which as the day wore on, would unwind them and set down on their lawns and pitches the bouncing ponies, whose forefeet just struck the ground, and up they sprung, the whirling young men, and laughing girls in their transparent muslins, who even now, after dancing all night, were taking their absurd woolly dogs for a run. And even now, at this hour, discreet old dowagers were shooting out in their motor cars on errands of mystery. And the shopkeepers were fidgeting in their windows with their paste and diamonds, their lovely old sea green brooches in 18th century settings to tempt Americans. But one must economize, not buy things rashly for Elizabeth. And she, too, loving it as she did with an absurd and faithful passion, being part of it, since her people were courtiers once in the time of the Georges. She, too, was going there that very night to kindle and illuminate, to give her party. But now, strange, on entering the park, the silence, the mist, the hum, the slow swimming happy ducks, the pouched birds waddling, and who should be coming along with his back against the government buildings, most appropriately, carrying a dispatch box stamped with the royal arms. Who but Hugh Whitbread, her old friend Hugh, the admirable Hugh. And that one was also tasty. Very expectant, very image rich, and different transportation through time. There was like bits and pieces of a flashback, flashes of imagery, the windows flying open, birds, a bunch of magic here, colors and images and names, and the language meanders so sweetly. Really, really just pretty and gorgeous, flowery, but not too much, still communicating, telling a vague story, expectancies and feelings, sentiments. I think it's really nice, a nice piece, certainly. Thank you for choosing that, David. What did you think of the read, and what do you think of this text? I'd love to know. Mike, David, Mike.
Sorry about that. The read was excellent, and what you want to keep in mind is that this is a stream of conscious, so it comes in waves and flashes, and it's broken and almost what some might call schizophrenic, but it's not actually, that's not actually what schizophrenic is, but it's sort of a fractured stream of consciousness. And it's biographical because Virginia Woolf herself suffered from what is called neuroprogressive bipolar disorder. And that's basically a bipolar depression, where what happened was that over the most of her adult life, she had very intense bouts of the manic creative spurts, and then she had very low points where she would lock herself in her room and write in her diary and hardly leave her room or even speak to her husband. So, and you have to also keep in mind the era that she lived in. Medical science just didn't understand enough what bipolar disorder was. So it's really about what happened to her over a period of living through of what medicine could offer her for for support, and what her family could do for her. But it's a remarkable book because it opens, like you say, with this kind of optimism, and you can sense the author trying to break out of what was a depressive cycle. I mean, it bursts. She literally bursts, with the first line, "What a lark, what a plunge." So there's a definite sense of joy in the text.
Yes, well, I have to agree. Go ahead,
So,
you were saying.
yeah. So people might be wondering why I'm contrasting these. It's a lot. It has a lot to do with stream of consciousness and the high energy and the vividness of the imagery.
Well, I would dare to make a suggestion as to why, because I think I already see. I'll use the word grogginess. One of them is the drunken boat, and the consciousness of the person is fractured, fragmented, scattered around. And this person, Virginia Woolf, you're saying she has, she has issues, she has bipolar or whatever. And the drunken boat and this little fragment of her mind, they're very similar, because they're all disjointed and whirling around, like all the images and the feelings, the sensations, and again, the expectancy or the recollection, the introspection. It's definitely a stream of consciousness, like you're saying, but I think the wisdom is in the mystery of this voice, the mystery of both of these voices, because it's not verbatim telling you anything. It's wandering and meandering. It's it's all over the place. Like the scattered thoughts of someone who was just at ease, or someone who was beleaguered by some affliction, rising out of intoxication, or perhaps needing intoxication in order to cope. And that's really a hell of an achievement to have on the paper, to be able to write in this way. You'll hear people say all day, clarity, clarity, clarity. But if this were clarified, if we took both of these passages and we tried to clarify them, we would destroy them. Sometimes it's mystery, mystery, mystery. I hate to tell people. Clarity only goes so far. There's certain things you want clear, and when it comes to the continuity of the text, that's certainly not what obviously that has to be continuous. What I'm talking about is the mystery, the way these are written. It still functions. It's a beautiful, fascinating read. In the case of the 16-year-old poet, it's monumental. But in her case, it's the same thing. I mean, it's like an afternoon or a string of afternoons that she's remembering one afternoon, you know, or a morning. She's remembering all these different times. That's the similarity, is it's memory. It's a wandering recollection. And to study passages like this would help the person. Like if your main character, bear with me, if your main character is intoxicated or has been drugged or has been bludgeoned and is a little bit unclear upstairs, this is how you would want to write. You would want to write in this mode. You wouldn't want everything to be clear and coherent. You would want this strangeness, this up the stairs, down the stairs type of thing, where it's all over the place. It's like they're picking up the pieces. So wouldn't that be a reason for the pairing of this, David? What do you say about that?
This certainly sounds like a very valid account of the pairing, but I think what I was trying to do was bring them together in a way. There doesn't seem to be any logical relationship between the two texts. One is very regulated, and that would, I would say, would be the poem. It has a very strong rhythm to it, and
Yes.
This is fractured, like it's almost like a stained glass window. The the Virginia Woolf piece. It's full of these brilliant. It's as if the sun is shining through the text, and you have all of these bright, almost chaotic and almost. I don't want to say angry. I would say possibly aggressive. Like there's an aggressiveness coming from the outside of the world and shining into her bedroom, and she's throwing open these windows and she's greeting the day, and she's trying to muster up the energy to have a purpose in that particular energy in that daylight. So there is an adaptation in film called The Hours, and one of the it's taken from this book. Part of it is taken from this book. And this is the idea that she suddenly makes what to most people would seem a rather innocuous decision to, rather than send a servant out to purchase flowers, that she would go and do it herself. And so the idea is that she is. It doesn't sound like it's a much of an investment in her energy, but you have to keep in mind that hidden thing that you were talking about, which is it's biographical, and poor Virginia Woolf suffered from depression her entire adult life, and it just overcame her, and it was too much. So it actually turns this little passage into a very heroic act when we look at it, if you keep in mind the author and what she was going through at the time.
Yes. Well, I see what you mean there, and I value the point you make when it comes to all of that, the aggression or frustration or whatever it is that's there, and that's sort of also shared by both, because it's not just a question of consciousness, it's a question of disposition and what it is that they're analyzing as they recall, as the recollections go streaming by. So that does make a lot of sense.
There's a sort of an entrance here that I can make a point about all creative writers, poets and novelists. Poets and creatives, novelists, fiction writers, artists, we all live in a sort of hyper awareness of the world around us. And we can often perceive the world as being aggressive and adversarial in some ways. There's a marvelous scene in a movie by Woody Allen where there's a scene, Diane Keaton plays a poetess, and she's sitting in her bedroom. She's trying to write a poem, and as she's writing the poem, she looks out to the window, and what she sees is it's early spring, I think, or maybe early fall or late fall, and there are just tree branches in her. As she's peering out her window, she just sees these tree branches, and they're kind of pressing in and giving her this feeling that she's not safe. And I often think of that kind of environment. I think you, Ricky, as a poet too, you can understand that kind of hypersensitivity that all creative people live through.
Yes, yes. And I see what you mean there. And that's the essence of it. The flow of consciousness, the flow of awareness. The awareness is the senses, sensorium. Consciousness is, am I awake or am I dreaming? Dreaming is the ultimate depth, where unconsciousness is consciousness. And when you have a twilight, the way that they're doing, like I said, it's an intermix of clarity, mystery, clarity, mystery. And there's little bits and pieces, little heads that rise up out of the miasma and then plunge back down beneath. And that's what both of these texts do. And that I would attribute to their genius. Because if they just came out and they did an outline of all these things and they just came out without poetry and said, yeah, I went on a boat. These guys died. Things were weird. There's nothing there. Like if it reads like stereo instructions, but the way they meander, the way that they wander and travel through the wilderness of recollections, down the deer paths, remembering. I mean, what memory is so potent, for the poet. Recollection and introspection, it's immensely powerful. It's where a lot of stuff comes from when we write.
Yes.
This is just a fantastic selection. So just remember, folks, when you're writing, especially if you're trying to write something that is of a unique perspective, a unique awareness or consciousness, like someone sick, someone rising up from a deep sleep, someone who's drunk, someone who's mentally incapacitated or disabled or whatever it is, you have to try to envision what it's like to be them. You have to apply some sort of gloss of mystery. It can't just be a verbatim thing. Otherwise, there'll be no wonderment, or at least there'll be an insufficient amount of wonderment. Which is another thing. You could read these passages and just wonder, where did it come from? And that's part of what it is to be a creative. So this has been a great show. We got a piece of wisdom. We were able to read these things and discuss, and we learn another lesson. What to do, what not to do. A little bit of a juggling act. Thank you, David, for providing us with these selections. Thank you, listeners, for checking out what we have to do, which is help you try to figure out poetic voice fulfillment and to configure your wordplay, your language play, so that you can write beautiful, original, authentic, compelling writing. That JWC, that's what we want for you. We want you to write different. It's up to you to improve, but it's up to us to say different. Why? And get you on down that path, which is a lot of fun, because these shows, they go by like that. Time flies when you're having fun, and especially when you're being creative, when your third eye's open. The hours blink by. It makes the clock bearable to me. Please do, folks, head over to joeswritersclub.com. joeswriters.club is our forums. Head over to our social media, JWC. We're on all the platforms. Go check us out, and especially on YouTube, where we have a YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. share these videos, because we're trying to help people, like I said, become different writers. And we ourselves are also learning, because the refinement of process is ongoing. It's an unending thing. Doesn't matter what level of creativity or masterhood you're in, there's always more. There's more to do. If we lived 1,000 years, you'd still, at this point, we'd all still be novices. It doesn't matter how many words we've written. So thanks a lot for listening to Joe's Writers Club JWC Livestream, Sublimated Posey with David and Ricky. David, thank you for being on the show today.
You're welcome.
Yep. You guys take care, everyone out there, and have a happy holiday. Turkey Day is right around the corner. Eat some stuffing for me. It would honor me if you did so. And read some poetry
Yes.
at the Thanksgiving table.
Yes, please do that. Please do that.
Yeah, embrace poetry and embrace the poetic spirit, because it makes things beautiful and hideous just the way they're supposed to be. So much would be left behind if you don't bring poetry into your hearts, especially as a creative writer. So much is left behind. So go out and pick it up, take it. And we'll see you guys next time.